On the beaches of Saipan, 125,000 American boys were sleeping in foxholes, Marines from Ohio, soldiers from Texas, boys whose fathers had fought the last war. 355 miles west of them, the largest Japanese carrier force since Pearl Harbor was turning toward those beaches. And the only man who could stop it was standing alone on a cruiser's bridge, refusing to give the order every officer in the room was begging him to give. Night, June 18, 1944, the Philippine Sea. On the flat bridge of the cruiser USS Indianapolis, a single overhead light burns above a chart table. Outside the windows, the ocean is black, the horizon erased, the sky a moonless wash of stars that gives nothing away. Inside, a man in a clean khaki uniform stands with a folded message in his hand. He does not pace. He does not speak. He does not ask his staff what they think. His name is Raymond Ames Spruance. He is 57 years old. He is the commander of the United States Fifth Fleet, the largest naval force ever assembled in human history. And he has exactly 1 hour to make a decision that the men in this room will remember for the rest of their lives. The message is from Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, the carrier striking arm of the fleet. Mitcher is asking permission to take his carriers west through the night. He wants to close the distance to the Japanese fleet. He wants to be in strike position at dawn. He wants to hunt the carriers while the chance still exists. The Japanese fleet has been located. Radio direction finding has placed Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa roughly 355 miles to the west-southwest. 9 Japanese carriers, more than 400 aircraft, the largest enemy carrier force the United States Navy has faced since Pearl Harbor. Every aviator in the fleet knows what this opportunity means. Every aviator in this room is waiting for Spruance to say yes. Captain Arleigh Burke, Mitcher's chief of staff, is 42 years old, sharp-eyed, ambitious, the kind of officer who will one day become the longest-serving chief of naval operations in American history. He believes in this moment that Spruance is about to make the worst mistake of the war. Spruance reads the message. He turns it over, he reads it again, he walks to the window, he looks at nothing. 1 hour passes. At 38 minutes past midnight, he signals back to Mitcher. The answer is no. The reasoning is 20 words long. End run by other carrier groups remains possibility and must not be overlooked. No apology, no explanation, no invitation to discuss. In the room, no one agrees with him. 2 months later, Admiral John Towers, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, will file a formal written request demanding that Spruance be relieved of command. Not a complaint at dinner, a written demand. It will circulate through the Pacific Fleet like a virus. Spruance will say nothing in his own defense. Not then, not later, not ever. Before we go further, ask yourself something. You just heard what happened in that room. Mitcher wanted to go west. Spruance said no. Every aviator in the Pacific Fleet said Spruance was wrong. What would you have done? Chase the carriers, or stay and protect the troops on the beach? There is no clean answer. That is exactly why this story matters. To understand the man who stood at that window for an hour and refused to flinch, you have to understand something strange about him. Something his enemies in Tokyo eventually understood before his own colleagues in Pearl Harbor did. There is a reference book called Who's Who in America. During the Second World War, most senior officers had entries running a paragraph, sometimes a column. Raymond Spruance's entry was 3 lines long. Name, rank, 2 facts, his choice. Reporters came to interview him throughout the war and after. They sat with him in his cabin. They sat with him in his garden. They asked questions. They left with nothing printable. This was not shyness. He explained it himself once, in a speech at the Naval Academy. Personal publicity in a war, he said, can be a drawback, because it may affect a man's thinking. A man's judgment is best when he can forget himself and any reputation he may have acquired and concentrate wholly on making the right decision. He was not avoiding the press. He was protecting his own mind from his own ego. While Spruance was sitting in silence with reporters, Admiral William Halsey, 61 years old, was on the cover of Time magazine. Halsey's quotes were on recruitment posters. His name was in the newspapers every week. 2 admirals, the same ocean, the same war. One was built for public consumption. The other was built for something else. His wife asked him, years later, what he made of all of it. The whole long stretch from Pearl Harbor to Tokyo Bay. He thought for a moment. Then he said, it was interesting. That was the whole answer. His biography is called The Quiet Warrior. The historian who wrote it, Thomas Buell, spent years studying him. Buell called him an intellectual in the purest sense, a man of superior mental power. And then he noted, almost in passing, that Spruance never published a word, gave no speeches worth remembering, and had no formal education beyond Annapolis. What he had was something harder to name. The ability to think without needing anyone to see him thinking. The ability to be right without needing to be known for it. Captain George Dyer served under both Spruance and Halsey. He described the difference in terms any sailor would understand. My feeling, Dyer said, was one of confidence when Spruance was there, and one of concern when Halsey was there. When you moved into Admiral Halsey's command, you never knew what you were going to do in the next 5 minutes. When you moved into Admiral Spruance's command, the printed instructions were up to date, and you did things in accordance with them. That is not a historian's verdict from a quiet office. That is a ship captain's daily reality. Across the Pacific, in Tokyo, a different kind of officer was being produced. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was a national icon. When he died in April 1943, shot down over Bougainville in an American ambush, the Empire of Japan went into official state mourning. The system that produced Yamamoto rewarded men who projected certainty. Men who spoke in the language of decisive battle. Men who looked like they already knew they were going to win. Men whose confidence was itself a military asset. Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa was considered that system's most sophisticated product. He was 57 years old, tall, austere, the tallest officer in the entire Imperial Japanese Navy. He was a carrier warfare theorist. He had mastered the doctrine of carrier operations from first principles, scientifically, mathematically, despite never having flown a plane himself. The difference between Ozawa and Spruance was not intelligence. Both were sharp. Both were serious. Both had spent their careers thinking carefully about naval war. The difference was what their systems asked of them. One system asked its admirals to win battles. The other system asked its admirals to look like they were winning battles. The gap between those two things is where the war was decided. But before Spruance could face Ozawa, before the night on the bridge of the Indianapolis, he first had to survive a system that almost did not pick him. Go back 2 years, May 1942. In a hospital bed in Pearl Harbor lies Admiral William Halsey. He is covered head to foot in a severe dermatitis. His skin is raw. He cannot sleep. He cannot stand his duties. The condition is debilitating, painful, undignified, and it could not have come at a worse possible moment. Admiral Chester Nimitz, the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, needs a replacement within days. The Japanese fleet is moving toward Midway Atoll, the most consequential naval operation the United States has planned since the war began is about to unfold, and the man who was supposed to lead the American carriers cannot get out of bed. Nimitz asks Halsey one question. Who should command in your place? Halsey does not hesitate. He names Raymond Spruance, not because Spruance is the obvious choice, not because anyone on the staff had been pushing his name, not because the system has been preparing him for this, because Halsey has worked alongside Spruance for months. He has watched him in close quarters, and he trusts that man's judgment above every other officer he can name. That trust, offered from a hospital bed by a man too sick to fight his own battle, is the only reason Raymond Spruance is in this story at all. Spruance has never commanded a carrier task force. He has never flown a plane. His entire career has been destroyers, cruisers, battleships, the older, slower, gun-centered world of naval warfare. He walks onto the flag bridge of the USS Enterprise, inheriting Halsey's staff. Men who did not choose him, men who are watching carefully to see whether this surface officer understands what he is holding. He launches, on the morning of June 4, 1942, Spruance sends his dive bombers at extreme range, a range that leaves almost no margin for error. He gambles on catching Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo's carriers in the middle of rearming. He catches them. By afternoon, 4 Japanese fleet carriers are burning. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, the strike force that had launched against Pearl Harbor, the force that had swept across the Indian Ocean, the most powerful carrier formation on the planet, gone in hours. That night, against the recommendation of his staff, Spruance pulls his fleet east, away from the retreating Japanese surface ships, away from the chance to finish Yamamoto's main force. The criticism is immediate. Too cautious, missed opportunity, should have pressed the advantage. The aviators talk among themselves on the hangar decks. The man does not understand what he just won. He does not understand how to finish them. What nobody on the American side knew at the time was this. Yamamoto had sent his surface battle fleet east that night, specifically, deliberately. He had ordered it to find Spruance and destroy him in the dark. If Spruance had kept heading west, his carriers would have sailed directly into that force, in the dark, without air cover, outgunned by battleships and heavy cruisers that would have closed to gun range and torn his ships apart before sunrise. The 3 American carriers that survived Midway, including Enterprise herself, would have been at the bottom of the Pacific by dawn. The decision that drew the most criticism was the decision that saved the fleet. Spruance never said so. He did not explain it to the critics. He did not correct the record. He did not give an interview to set them straight. He went back to work. That was the pattern. It would be the pattern for the rest of his career. The pattern that would, 2 years later, place him on the bridge of the Indianapolis with a message from Mitcher in his hand and an hour to decide. But there is another thread running through Midway that matters. A thread that runs the other way across the ocean. Because while one American admiral was learning what kind of commander he was going to be, the Imperial Japanese Navy was absorbing a lesson it was not yet capable of learning. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo had been chosen to command Kido Butai, the Japanese carrier strike force at Midway, because he had led it successfully at Pearl Harbor. The logic was clean. The man who won the last battle commands the next one. But Pearl Harbor and Midway were not the same battle. Pearl Harbor was a surprise strike against a fixed target, an unalerted enemy, a harbor full of ships at anchor. Everything about it rewarded a certain kind of command, careful planning in advance, disciplined execution on the morning, aggressive attack against an enemy who could not effectively shoot back. Midway required something else entirely. Midway required split-second decisions under contradictory information. It required choosing between 2 bad options in the middle of an air attack. It required the ability to accept ambiguity and act anyway. Nagumo was not built for that kind of battle. The system that elevated him had never noticed the difference between the two. When the moment came, when the contradictory reports started coming in, when his scout planes told him there were American carriers nearby, after he had already armed his reserve aircraft for a second strike on Midway, Nagumo did what a reasonable officer does. He reversed the order, rearm for ships. The rearming was half done when the American dive bombers found him. He lost 45 minutes he could never get back. Not because he hesitated, not because he was a coward, because 2 reasonable decisions, made in sequence under impossible pressure, produced one catastrophic result. This is the part most accounts miss. Nagumo did not fail because he was stupid. He failed because the system that put him in that chair had never prepared him to sit in it. He was a torpedo officer. He had spent his career on surface ships. He was given the most advanced carrier strike force in the world because he had succeeded at a different mission with the same ships. Not cowardice, not stupidity. A system that placed a man in a role it had never trained him to fill. In a hospital bed in Pearl Harbor, the American Navy had stumbled into the opposite mistake. Halsey was sick. The wrong man, by every conventional measure, had taken command. The surface officer, the non-aviator, the man with no carrier background, and he had won. 2 years later, the same dynamic would play out again, on the other side of the ocean, with much higher stakes. But this time, the Japanese admiral facing Spruance would not be Nagumo. He would not be a man placed in the wrong chair by an indifferent system. He would be Ozawa, the theorist, the student, the man who had spent the years between Midway and the Marianas, reading every report he could find about the American admiral with the three-line entry in Who's Who. The man who had decided in advance exactly what Raymond Spruance was going to do. He was going to be wrong. And on the night of June 18, 1944, on the flag bridge of the USS Indianapolis, the only man in the room who understood why was the quiet one standing at the window, holding a folded message refusing to move. To understand what was about to happen in the Philippine Sea, you have to understand what was happening on the beaches, 355 miles to the east, Saipan, June 15, 1944. 3 days before the night on the bridge of the Indianapolis, American Marines and Army soldiers have come ashore under fire from coral ridges and concealed artillery. By dusk on the first day, 20,000 men are on the beach. By the third day, the number is climbing past 125,000. Marines, soldiers, engineers, medics, boys from Ohio and Texas and Kentucky who had never seen the ocean until they boarded the troop ships. The transports that brought them are still anchored off the western beaches. Their landing craft are still in the water, still shuttling supplies, still hauling wounded. The shipping is exposed, it cannot move, it cannot defend itself. It is held in place by the operation it exists to support. Behind the transports screening them stands Task Force 58, 15 American carriers, more than 900 aircraft, the most powerful naval force on the planet. If that force moves west, the transports have no cover. If the transports have no cover, and a Japanese surface force comes around behind the carrier screen, those 125,000 men on the beach become hostages to whatever sails in. This is the situation. This is what Raymond Spruance is holding in his head when the message from Mitscher arrives. But Spruance is not the only admiral with a plan. On the other side of the Philippine Sea, in the flag plot of a brand new aircraft carrier called Taiho, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa has been preparing for this moment for months. The operation has a name. Operation Ego, the decisive battle, the engagement that, in the deepest secret hopes of the Imperial Japanese Navy, will reverse the trajectory of the war. Ozawa is not a man who deals in fantasy. He knows the numbers. 9 Japanese carriers against 15 American, roughly 430 aircraft against nearly 900. He is operating under no illusion about force parity. He has read the same intelligence reports the Americans have written about themselves. He understands what he is sailing toward. His plan is not designed to win by superior numbers. His plan is designed to win by geometry. Japanese carrier aircraft, in the summer of 1944, still hold one slim advantage over their American counterparts. They carry more fuel. They fly farther. The difference is not dramatic, but in carrier warfare it does not need to be dramatic. 100 miles of extra range properly used can change the entire shape of an engagement. If Ozawa can position himself far enough from Task Force 58, he can launch strikes that American aircraft cannot return. He can attack without being attacked back. He can hit and stand off and hit again. It has a name in Japanese naval doctrine. The outer air battle, strike from beyond reach. There is more. Within range of the operating area lie the airfields of Guam, Tinian, and Rota, hundreds of land-based aircraft. If Ozawa launches his carrier strikes at extreme range, his pilots do not need to return to their ships. They can fly through the American fleet, drop their bombs, continue east, and land on the islands, refuel, rearm, fly back the next day, hit the Americans a second time, from the other direction, on the way home, the shuttle attack. 2 strikes for the cost of 1. On paper, in the planning rooms of the combined fleet, it is the most sophisticated carrier engagement the Japanese Navy has ever designed. The plan that will finally restore the strategic balance in the Pacific. But the plan has one requirement, one non-negotiable assumption written into the operational order before a single ship moves. The American commander will advance west when contact is made. That is the assumption. The entire architecture of the operation, the positioning of the fleet, the geometry of the strike, the placement of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's heavy ships as a bait force in front of Ozawa's main carrier groups. Every piece of it depends on the American admiral doing what every previous American admiral has done. Chase the carriers. This is where the story turns, because Ozawa is not making a generic assumption about American behavior. He is making a specific assumption about a specific man. According to a detailed analysis published years later in the United States Naval Institute proceedings, Ozawa had studied Spruance's record carefully enough to calibrate his plan around it. He knew about Midway. He knew about the night Spruance had pulled east. He knew about the controversy that decision had created inside the American Navy. He knew that Spruance had a reputation for what his critics called caution and his defenders called discipline. And he made a prediction. He predicted that Spruance, in possession of a confirmed contact on a Japanese carrier force 355 miles to the west, would do what every aviator in the United States Navy believed he should do. He would close the range. He would press the attack. He would do exactly what Mitchell would tell him to do at midnight on June 18th. Ozawa was not dismissing Spruance. He was studying him. He was staking the operational future of the Imperial Japanese Navy on having correctly understood how this one quiet man would act under maximum pressure. He had read the file. He had drawn his conclusion, and then he had built a battle plan around that conclusion. He was about to find out what happens when you understand a man's logic perfectly and underestimate his character entirely. There is something else Spruance was holding on that bridge, something that does not appear in most accounts of the battle, something that changes the entire moral weight of the decision. American naval intelligence, by the spring of 1944, had pieced together a clear understanding of Japanese carrier doctrine. It included an option Japanese planners themselves had a name for. The end run. The end run worked like this. A Japanese carrier force would be deliberately exposed to American reconnaissance. The American fleet would detect it, fix on it, move to engage. As the American carriers closed the distance, a second Japanese force kept hidden would swing wide around the flank. It would bypass the American carrier screen entirely. It would emerge behind the American line of advance, 200 miles, 300 miles in the rear, and attack the invasion shipping while the American carriers were chasing nothing. The amphibious force would be caught alone. The transports would be sunk in their anchorages. The Marines on the beach would lose their resupply, their reinforcement, their evacuation routes. The campaign would not stall. The campaign would collapse. This was not speculation. This was not a theory worked out by some clever American staff officer in a smoke-filled room. This was written Japanese doctrine. In American hands, on Spruance's desk. He had read it. He knew the trap could exist because he had seen the recipe. When Vice Admiral Mitchell's request came in late on the night of June 18th, asking permission to take the carriers west, Spruance was not weighing intuition against intuition. He was weighing intuition against a piece of paper that described, in his enemy's own words, exactly the scenario that would unfold if he did what Mitchell wanted. Shortly before midnight, a fresh signal arrived from Admiral Nimitz at Pearl Harbor. Radio direction finding had produced a confirmed bearing on Ozawa's force. 355 miles, west-southwest. Closing. Mitchell sent his request immediately. The logic was sound and Spruance knew it. If Task Force 58 steamed west through the darkness, by dawn it could be within striking distance. The Japanese carriers would still be beyond effective American attack range, but the gap would be closed by dawn, and the first strike of the day would be American. Arleigh Burke, waiting outside the decision room, would describe it later in plain words. "We knew," he said, "we were going to have hell slugged out of us in the morning. And we knew we couldn't reach them." Spruance sat with the message for over an hour. He would write to the historian Samuel Eliot Morison, years afterward, with characteristic honesty about what he had felt. "I think," he wrote, that going out after the Japanese and knocking their carriers out would have been much better and more satisfactory than waiting for them to attack us. But we were at the start of a very important and large amphibious operation, and we could not afford to gamble. He knew what the more satisfying answer was. He chose the correct one. At 38 minutes past midnight, June 19th, 1944, he signaled Mitscher. End run by other carrier groups remains possibility and must not be overlooked. No explanation, no apology, no invitation to discuss further. On the other side of the Philippine Sea, Ozawa was already in position. His final order to the fleet had gone out just after midnight. The language was deliberate, ceremonial, drawn from the most sacred moment in Japanese naval memory. This operation, he told his ships, has an immense bearing on the fate of the empire. It is hoped that all forces will do their utmost. It was the language of Admiral Togo at Tsushima in 1905. Every Japanese officer hearing it understood the weight. This was the decisive battle. This was the moment they had been training for since they were boys at the Naval Academy in Etajima. And in that moment, the entire weight of the plan rested on one assumption. The American admiral is coming west. The American admiral was not coming west. Just after dawn on June 19th, before the main Japanese strike force could be properly launched, something happened that almost broke the trap open in Ozawa's favor. Rear Admiral Sueo Obayashi, commanding Carrier Division 3, the forward group, made his own contact with American aircraft. His scouts reported a chance to strike Task Force 58 while the Americans were still preparing their morning operations. Obayashi did not hesitate. He began launching fighters and dive bombers. The first wave was already turning into the wind when his radio crackled with a signal from Ozawa. Stand down, recover the strike, let us do it properly tomorrow. Obayashi obeyed. The aircraft came back down to the deck. The chance evaporated. In the precise moment when an aggressive Japanese commander might have struck, the only blow that could have changed the day, Ozawa overrode his subordinate in the name of the plan. The plan was a clockwork mechanism. The plan required coordination. The plan assumed the geometry would hold and the prey would behave as predicted. The plan did not have room for improvisation. The one moment of surprise the Japanese Navy was offered, that morning in the largest carrier engagement of the war, was given away by the man who had designed the trap. He was so confident in his prediction of Spruance that he traded an actual opportunity for a theoretical one. By mid-morning, the geometry was holding from the Japanese side. The American carriers were not moving toward him. They were not moving at all. Then the first wave launched, 69 aircraft, climbing from the decks of Ozawa's forward group, climbing to attack altitude, forming up, pushing east at cruise. American radar picked them up more than 150 miles out. There is a specific moment in the morning of June 19th, 1944, when the war in the Pacific tipped over an edge it would never come back from. It is not a moment any single witness fully saw. It is a moment that happened simultaneously across hundreds of American flight decks and combat information centers and gun directors. The radar plots filled with green blooms moving slowly east. The fighter directors began to talk. The Hellcats began to climb. By the time the first Japanese strike crossed the outer screen of American picket destroyers, the F-6F Hellcats of Task Force 58 were at altitude, stacked, waiting, position perfect. The intercept controllers had vectored them into a kill funnel that the Japanese pilots, most of them recent graduates of an accelerated training program that had cut their flight hours by more than half, would fly straight into. The first wave lost 42 of 69 aircraft before it ever sighted an American carrier. The second wave was worse. Of 128 aircraft launched, 98 were shot down. The third and fourth waves brought the day's totals to numbers that the Imperial Japanese Navy would never recover from. Roughly 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed in a single day of air combat. An American pilot, watching the first wave come in, said it was like an old-time turkey shoot. The name stuck. It was not wrong. But while the Hellcats were tearing through the Japanese strikes, Two American submarines were already changing the strategic shape of the day. USS Albacore, patrolling submerged on the western flank, had Ozawa's flagship Taiho in her periscope shortly after 8 in the morning. The fire control officer fired a spread of 6 torpedoes. 5 of them missed. One was on a perfect track to amidships when Warrant Officer Sakio Komatsu, climbing from Taiho's own flight deck moments after takeoff, saw the torpedo's wake and deliberately crashed his aircraft into it. The pilot died. The fighter exploded. A second torpedo, the 6th, continued on its course and struck Taiho behind the forward elevator. The damage looked minor. The carrier kept making 30 knots. Ozawa stayed on the bridge. Around midday, USS Kavala closed on the veteran carrier Shokaku. The submarine fired 6 torpedoes from close range. 3 of them hit Shokaku, the ship that had launched aircraft against Pearl Harbor. The ship that had survived Coral Sea and the Eastern Solomons began to burn. Fires reached her bomb storage in mid-afternoon. She blew apart and went down with most of her crew. On Taiho, the situation was changing in a way no one on board immediately understood. The single torpedo hit had ruptured fuel lines. Aviation gasoline vapor was leaking into the lower compartments. A junior damage control officer, trying to do the right thing, ordered the ventilation system run at full power to clear the fumes. He was distributing the vapor through the entire ship instead. For hours, the lethal atmosphere built. Then, in the middle of the afternoon, something ignited it. The exact source was never determined. The result was a series of explosions that lifted the flight deck, blew out the hangar walls, and turned the most modern aircraft carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy into a furnace. Ozawa had to be physically restrained from going down with the ship. His staff transferred him by boat to a destroyer, then to the cruiser Haguro, then finally to the carrier Zuikaku, where he resumed command late in the day. Still believing, on the strength of reports from his pilots that had been delayed and garbled, that his strikes were succeeding. He did not yet know that he had lost the day. The next morning brought the second act of the disaster. Task Force 58 had spent the night searching. Scouting aircraft fanned out across hundreds of miles of empty ocean. The Japanese fleet, what was left of it, had been pulling away through the dark. It was not until late afternoon on June 20th that an American scout finally found Ozawa. The position was at the edge of feasible attack range. The fleet was approximately 220 nautical miles away. The sun was 3 hours from setting. Vice Admiral Mark Mitscher had a decision to make that was, in its own way, as hard as the one Spruance had made 2 nights earlier. If he launched the strike, his pilots would arrive over the Japanese fleet near sunset. They would have to attack in fading light. They would have to fly back in full darkness. Many of them, perhaps most of them, would run out of fuel before they could reach the American carriers. They would have to ditch in the open sea at night. He launched anyway, 240 aircraft into the dusk. The strike found Ozawa. The carrier Hio took 2 bomb hits and a torpedo, caught fire and sank that evening. 2 oilers were sunk. Junyo and Zuikaku were damaged. Aircraft losses on the Japanese side rose by another 65 planes. Then the American pilots turned for home in the dark. The fuel gauges started reading empty before any of them could see their carriers. Mitscher, on the bridge of the carrier Lexington, watching the radar plot fill with the returning aircraft and watching the fuel state reports come in, gave an order that violated every standing principle of nighttime fleet operations. Turn on the lights. Across the entire task force, deck lights came on. Truck lights came on. Searchlights stabbed into the sky. Star shells fired from the destroyers. Glow lights along the flight deck edges. A constellation of American steel, fully illuminated, in the middle of an ocean still full of Japanese submarines, telling every lost pilot in the air, "We are here. Come home." Some made it. Some did not. Approximately 80 aircraft were lost that night, most of them to water landings or crashes in the dark. The destroyers and float planes spent the next 2 days fishing pilots out of the sea. When the accounting was done, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 3 fleet carriers, approximately 600 aircraft, and the vast majority of its remaining experienced carrier pilots. American losses were roughly 130 aircraft, most of them due to fuel exhaustion during the nighttime recovery. Ozawa escaped with 6 carriers. Among them, between all 6 ships, there were 35 operational aircraft. He had a fleet that could still float. He had nothing left to fly off it. On the cruiser Indianapolis, Raymond Spruance read the damage reports without visible reaction. He had not chased the carriers. He had not delivered the satisfying knockout blow that every aviator in the Pacific Fleet had wanted him to deliver. He had, instead, stayed exactly where he was supposed to be, and the Imperial Japanese Carrier Force, the instrument that had attacked Pearl Harbor, the instrument that had ruled the Western Pacific for 2.5 years, had broken itself against the wall he refused to leave. When Ozawa reached the anchorage at Okinawa, he wrote out his resignation in his own hand and presented it to Admiral Soimu Toyoda, the commander-in-chief of the combined fleet. Toyoda refused it, he said. "Is mine more than yours?" Ozawa did not argue. He did not claim bad luck. He did not blame the inexperience of his pilots, though their lack of training was the largest single tactical factor in what had happened. He understood what had happened. His plan had required Spruance to behave one way. Spruance had behaved another way, and 4 months later in the Leyte Gulf, another American admiral would prove exactly what Ozawa had needed Spruance to be. The verdict inside the American Navy came quickly, and it came hard. Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher wrote it down within days of the battle in a private after-action assessment that circulated through the senior officer ranks. The enemy, he said, escaped. His fleet was not sunk. The wording was professional. The meaning was unmistakable. The man at the top had let the chance of a generation slip through his hands. In wardrooms across the Pacific Fleet, the aviator community said it more plainly. This is what comes of placing a non-aviator in command over carriers. The phrase repeated itself at officers' club tables in Pearl Harbor, on hangar decks at Eniwetok, in staff meetings in San Francisco. A surface officer had been given the most powerful carrier force in history. A surface officer had used it like a shield. In August, Admiral John Towers, Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, one of the founding figures of American naval aviation, put it into formal writing, a request to Admiral Nimitz that Raymond Spruance be relieved of command of the Fifth Fleet. Nimitz read the request. He filed it. He said nothing publicly. The following month, Admiral Ernest King, the Chief of Naval Operations, the man who ran the entire United States Navy, flew into Saipan. He came down off the aircraft and walked directly to Spruance in front of the staff officers gathered to receive him and said it on the tarmac. "You did a damn fine job there. No matter what other people tell you, your decision was correct." Spruance listened. He nodded. He did not respond further. Across the ocean, Ozawa brought what was left of his fleet into the anchorage at Okinawa. 6 carriers, 35 aircraft, empty hangars, empty ready rooms. Tokyo could not afford to admit what those numbers meant. The 6 carriers stayed on the order of battle. They appeared in the strategic plans. They were counted as a force. They were not a force, they were ships. 4 months later, those same hollow ships would sail again. Their only purpose this time would be to be seen. October 1944, the Leyte Gulf. The American invasion of the Philippines is underway. Hundreds of thousands of troops are coming ashore. The transports are anchored off the beaches, exposed, vulnerable. The screening force is Admiral William Halsey's Third Fleet. The same ships, in many cases, that had been Spruance's Fifth Fleet 4 months earlier. The numbering changed when command rotated. The hulls did not. Ozawa is given a final mission. He is to take his 6 empty carriers north. He is to be seen on American radar. He is to be recognized as carriers. He is to draw the American fleet away from the invasion shipping. He is bait. He knows he is bait. He sails anyway. Halsey sees him. Halsey does not deliberate. He does not hold his position. He does not leave a covering force at San Bernardino Strait. He does not send a confirmation message to make sure the strait is covered. He takes Task Force 34 north at full speed. Every fast battleship, every fleet carrier, the whole striking arm of the fleet. He goes for the carriers. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, the most powerful surface battle line Japan has left, the super battleship Yamato. Musashi had been sunk the day before in the Sibuyan Sea. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, the works, comes through the unguarded San Bernardino Strait in the early morning darkness. It emerges into the calm water off Samar Island, behind the American line, and finds itself looking down at the invasion shipping with nothing in the way. Nothing except Taffy 3, a screen of escort carriers, destroyers, and destroyer escorts, small ships with small guns. Ships designed to support amphibious landings, not fight battleships. Ships whose largest weapon is a 5-inch gun firing against 16-inch and 18-inch shells. What follows in the next 3 hours is one of the most desperate engagements ever fought by the United States Navy. Destroyers charging battleships at flank speed. Pilots flying without bombs because there had been no time to rearm. Captains firing every round they had, and then firing star shells, and then firing nothing at all and still refusing to break off. It should have been a massacre. Kurita, in a decision history is still arguing about, broke off the engagement and turned back. He had been pounded by airstrikes through the morning. He had lost ships in the channel the day before. He believed he was facing fleet carriers, not escort carriers. He turned away with the invasion shipping still in his gun sights. Halsey, 300 miles to the north, was attacking the empty carriers. He had done, in October, exactly what Ozawa's plan in June had required Spruance to do. In June, Spruance had refused. In October, Halsey ran straight into it. Admiral Nimitz sent a dispatch from Pearl Harbor that became one of the most quoted messages of the Pacific War. The signal officers added padding to confuse Japanese codebreakers. The padding was read aloud by mistake when the message reached Halsey's bridge. It hit him as a personal rebuke from the man he most respected in the world. Where is Task Force 34? The world wonders. Halsey tore his cap from his head and threw it to the deck. No one ever sent that message to Raymond Spruance. The contrast was complete. 2 American admirals, 2 carrier baits, 4 months apart. One had read the plan correctly, one had not. And the man who had read it correctly was the one his own navy had wanted to relieve of command. Ozawa understood what had happened to him. He understood it in a way that took the American Navy years to catch up to. His plan had been a serious professional document. His prediction of Spruance had been the work of a man who studied his enemy with care. He had not dismissed Spruance. He had treated Spruance as the most dangerous opponent he had ever been asked to defeat. He had simply been wrong about which kind of dangerous Spruance actually was. He had assumed Spruance would not hold to his stated mission. When a Japanese fleet was 355 miles away and 430 aircraft were in the air, he had assumed that no admiral could hold that line under that pressure. He had assumed that the moment of glory, the moment of the kill, would be too much for any human being to refuse. He had underestimated, not Spruance's intelligence. He had underestimated Spruance's consistency. In December of 1945, with the war over, Admiral King sat down to write the memorandum that would weigh the candidates for the 5th star. Fleet Admiral, the highest rank the United States Navy can give. King wrote out his analysis of each candidate with the cold precision he was famous for. He noted Halsey's errors, the 2 typhoons in which ships were lost, the Leyte Gulf decision, and then he wrote, in his own hand, the sentence that should have ended the discussion. As to brains, Spruance was the best man in every way. He still recommended Halsey. Halsey had seniority. Congressman Carl Vinson, chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, had publicly endorsed Halsey. The press loved Halsey. In December of 1945, in the United States Congress, those things mattered in ways that the operational record did not. Spruance retired with 4 stars. Nimitz understood what had happened. Through the 1950s, he lobbied for Spruance's posthumous promotion. Not once, not quietly, year after year, he never succeeded. Decades later, members of Congress would try again. Bills would be introduced. Cases would be made. Evidence would be assembled. None of it would pass. The rank did not come because Raymond Spruance was not the right kind of famous. He had understood that about himself long before anyone needed to explain it to him. He went home to Pebble Beach, California. He wore old khaki trousers and work shoes. He walked 8 to 10 miles every morning along the Monterey coast with his schnauzer, Peter. He made hot chocolate for himself in the afternoons. He worked in his greenhouse. He worked in his garden. He wrote no memoir. He gave no lectures. He made no attempt to correct the record on any of the decisions that had been criticized. He was asked once, in writing, about the fifth star question. He answered with the cleanest sentence anyone ever wrote on the subject. So far as my getting 5-star rank is concerned, if I could have got it along with Bill Halsey, that would have been fine. But if I had received it instead of Bill Halsey, I would have been very unhappy over it. That is not a man who feels cheated. That is not bitterness in a clean shirt. That is a man who has made his peace with something most of us never accept about ourselves. That being right and being recognized for being right are two entirely different things, and only one of them actually matters. He died on December 13th, 1969, at 83 years old. He is buried at the Golden Gate National Cemetery in San Francisco, in the same ground as Chester Nimitz, where they wanted to be near each other one last time. The destroyers of the Spruance class served the United States Navy for more than 3 decades after his death. His enemy, the Japanese admiral who had built his greatest battle around correctly predicting his logic and incorrectly predicting his character, lived until 1966. Ozawa never publicly praised Spruance. He did not need to. He had already done it the only way a professional sailor could do it. He had bet his fleet on understanding the man across the ocean from him. He had gotten the man wrong. The American Navy got him wrong too. For years, only the quiet man at the window, holding a folded message, refusing to move, had ever gotten himself right. If your father, your grandfather, your uncle, anyone in your family served in the Pacific in any branch on any ship, leave their name and what they did in the comments. Don't just leave the name. Tell us one thing about them. The men who were there deserve more than a name in a database. They deserve to be remembered as people. Subscribe if you want the next story. There are more of them.